Welcome back to Reg Talk UK, the podcast that helps UK banking professionals stay sharp, stay informed, and stay ahead of regulation. I'm Alex.
And I'm Jane.
So today's briefing is really looking at this brutal collision between macroeconomic stress and some, quite uncompromising regulatory shifts.
Yeah, quite brutal, actually.
Right. We are unpacking that massive £1.3 billion shadow banking scandal, the one trapping Barclays in a, severe legal battle over counterparty risk in the High Court.
Which is just a fascinating case.
Oh, absolutely. And we're also examining the FCA sweeping, I think it's 900 Annex 1 firms.
Yeah, basically the whole register.
Right, to kill off these generic compliance models. Then we have a really interesting upper tribunal ruling that aggressively slashed FCA fines for 2 advisors, which, proves there's a strict limit to regulatory penalty amounts.
Thankfully for the industry.
Exactly. And finally, a rare operational gift, which you don't hear often. £108 million in transaction reporting savings, and what that tells us about the persistent FTSE valuation discount on UK banks.
I mean, the through line today really is transparency versus liability.
Yeah.
The fundamental definition of counterparty risk is just completely changing. The FCA is essentially trading technical reporting relief for strict, bespoke enforcement on financial crime and market integrity.
Right.
So if you are sitting in strategy or compliance or risk, the rules of engagement with your peers and your clients are being rewritten in real time.
Completely. So let's start with the macro squeeze because, you cannot understand the regulator's current paranoia regarding systemic risk without looking at the grim economic baseline we're dealing with.
No, you really can't.
According to the ONS, the data paints a highly stressed picture. 29% of UK firms are actively sweating over international conflict disrupting their supply chains this coming year.
29%.
Yeah. And on top of that, an enormous 70% of large firms are citing severe stress from energy and fuel costs.
And you have to add the FAO food price index to that domestic pressure, too.
Oh, right. The agriculture side.
Yeah. It edged up to 131.1 points for July.
Mm-hmm.
Global wheat prices alone, they surged 5.8% in a single month.
Just 1 month.
Just 1 month due to heat waves and disruptions across the Black Sea region. So we have this environment where the fundamental cost of doing business is surging, input costs are wildly volatile, and the Bank of England is maintaining a highly restrictive rate environment to contain it all.
Which brings us to the banking sector. How does that specific domestic cost push pressure directly threaten banks?
Well, it creates an intense margin squeeze on corporate borrowers, right?
Right.
When operating margins collapse and your traditional Tier 1 credit tightens up, the most desperate borrowers migrate toward the weakest links in the financial system.
The shadow banks.
Exactly. The shadow banks. When liquidity dries up, these highly complex, unregulated lending structures are mathematically the first to fracture.
Yeah.
Which, leads us straight into the collapse of market financial solutions.
Or MFS, yeah. For those who haven't read the High Court filings, this case is staggering.
It really is.
MFS was a shadow bank. They didn't take public deposits. They funded their property lending book entirely by drawing down these enormous credit facilities from major banks.
Yeah.
And they collapsed earlier this year with a £1.3 billion shortfall.
Billion with a B. And the allegations in the administration filings are just severe.
Yeah, the founder, Paresh Raja.
Right. He's accused of plundering the business to the tune of £408 million to fund this wildly lavish lifestyle. Funds were allegedly routed to personal accounts across Monaco, Singapore, and the UAE.
Wow.
Now, obviously, he strongly denies any fraud or dishonesty, but the administrators, AlixPartners, they've already secured freezing orders limiting his personal spending to, I think, £5,000 a week.
Yeah, $5,000 a week. But, the fraud allegations are almost a secondary issue for our audience.
Yeah, the real issue is the contagion.
Exactly. How this systemic threat travels upstream into the regulated sector. Barclays is currently locked in a high court battle with AlixPartners. When MFS imploded, Barclays was holding over £160 million belonging to various MFS entities in frozen accounts.
Right.
And Barclays is refusing to hand that cash over to the administrators because the bank has its own £500 million exposure to MFS that it desperately wants to offset.
And this exposes the exact mechanics of how shadow banking creates systemic risk, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
MFS was allegedly engaging in aggressive double pledging.
Yeah.
Mechanically, they would take a single commercial property asset, present the title to Barclays to secure a credit line,
Right.
and then use an obfuscated SPV to pledge that exact same underlying asset value to secure lines from Santander, Wells Fargo, Jefferies.
So the same asset multiple times.
Exactly. So when the market turned, multiple Tier 1 banks realized they were holding the exact same collateral.
But wait, if Barclays identifies transaction irregularities, freezes the accounts, and attempts to protect its balance sheet by offsetting its own losses, aren't they just fulfilling their fiduciary duty to their shareholders?
Well, you would think so.
Yeah, I mean, why is it their responsibility to warn rival banks like Santander or Wells Fargo?
Because the timeline of the fund flows is highly problematic here.
How so?
The administrators and other creditors allege that MFS was actively paying down its debt to Barclays, using fresh capital drawn from those other banks.
Oh, wow.
Crucially, this was allegedly happening right as Barclays was in the process of shutting down MFS's accounts due to its internal fraud concerns.
So Barclays is effectively getting made whole with Santander's capital, all while keeping the door shut because they know the foundation is collapsing.
That is the core of the interbank liability argument playing out right now.
Right.
The legal standard of the failure to warn is evolving. Creditors are arguing that a bank cannot act like a faulty circuit breaker, failing to trip and alert the wider grid, and instead quietly routing the dangerous surge into rival institutions.
I see.
The era of hiding behind strict bank creditor confidentiality to mask systemic fraud is facing a severe legal challenge. If you work in legal or risk, the takeaway is that interbank's transparency is beginning to override those old confidentiality rules. You just can no longer treat a distressed shadow bank as an isolated silo.
And that structural paranoia regarding unregulated entities is exactly why the FCA is completely overhauling the Annex 1 landscape right now.
They have to.
Yeah, they realize they cannot wait for another shadow bank to collapse. They have to intervene at the registration phase.
Which is why the regulator has sent formal information requests to roughly 900 registered Annex 1 firms.
900?
Yeah, they reviewed 300 firms last year, meaning this sweep covers essentially the entire registered sector.
And just to clarify for everyone, Annex 1 firms, we're talking financial leasing companies, safe custody providers, money brokers, unregulated lenders. They aren't fully authorized banks, but they do require FCA registration strictly for AML purposes.
Right. And the FCA is finding deep systemic flaws in how these firms operate. They're highly focused on the use of complex SPVs for lending.
Special purpose vehicles.
Yeah. While SPVs have legitimate corporate purposes, structurally, they're incredibly effective at fragmenting risk, obscuring ultimate beneficial owners, and masking the true origin of illicit fund flows.
The FCA also flagged a profound failure regarding parent company AML controls. Subsidiaries are operating highly specific lending models but relying entirely on generic group-level compliance manuals.
Yes, the generic manuals are a massive issue.
It is the corporate equivalent of trying to get into a nightclub using your parent's ID. The bouncer cannot verify your specific identity, and the FCA is finally saying, no, you need to prove your own identity and your own bespoke controls.
That's a brilliant analogy, and it goes deeper than just having a bespoke manual, actually.
How so?
The subsidiary must prove that its transaction monitoring algorithms actually match its specific operational risks. Like, if an Annex 1 firm specializes in financing agricultural equipment, applying a generic retail banking AML filter is totally useless.
Right, because the patterns are different.
Exactly. It won't catch the specific trade-based money laundering typologies inherent to heavy machinery exports. The FCA is essentially weaponizing the AML registration process, transforming it from a procedural hurdle into a primary diagnostic tool to disrupt financial crime early.
So what is the immediate operational burden for retail banks providing the clearing facilities and accounts for these Annex 1 firms?
Immediate and rigorous auditing. Retail banks must look beyond the glossy group-level policies of their Annex 1 clients. You need hard evidence of subsidiary-specific AML controls and direct FCA registration.
Right.
Relying on off-the-shelf compliance is now a massive regulatory liability. If your client is operating an SPV with generic AML controls, that compliance failure will travel straight up the pipe and crystallize on your balance sheet.
If you're finding this useful, don't forget to follow Reg Talk UK on Spotify or subscribe on YouTube. It really helps us reach more banking professionals like you. So the FCA is clearly talking tough on Annex 1 firms, but they just received a severe reality check in court regarding their enforcement power.
Oh, a huge reality check.
Yeah, the upper tribunal's ruling in the Fenech and Dunne case proves there is a hard limit to how the regulator calculates financial penalties.
This is a landmark ruling on fitness, propriety, and the strict mechanics of disgorgement.
Let's break that down.
So Richard Fenech and Heather Dunne were providing pension transfer advice, moving clients out of DB schemes into defined contribution arrangements.
Right.
Ms. Dunne traded as an independent financial advisor under an appointed representative agreement with a firm owned by Mr. Fenech.
And the FCA found they were operating a transfer and isolation model, or
Yeah.
TII, providing advice completely disconnected from the client's holistic financial position. Even worse, they were caught dishonestly providing a backdated AR agreement to the regulator, and Ms. Dunn falsely claimed to pension schemes that she had provided advice before she actually had.
Which is just indefensible. The tribunal upheld their industry bans without hesitation.
As they should.
As they should. But the critical twist for our audience is what happened to the financial penalties. Ms. Dunn's fine was gutted from nearly £400,000 down to just over $41,000.
That's a massive drop.
And Mr. Fenech's fine was slashed from £270,000 to about $16,000.
$16,000 from 270.
Yeah. They also defeated the FCA on the interest rate applied, forcing the regulator to use the Bank of England base rate rather than its standard 8% punitive rate.
But wait, if they were caught being dishonest and backdating legal documents to the regulator, why on earth did the tribunal let them off the hook financially? Does this mean the FCA's bark is worse than its bite?
Well, it comes down to the forensic maths of disgorgement. Disgorgement forces a wrongdoer to forfeit the specific profits derived from their breach.
Yeah.
The FCA took a blanket approach. They argued that because all of Mrs. Dunn's advice utilized templated passages and suitability reports, every single piece of advice was technically flawed. Therefore, they demanded 100% of her revenue as the proceeds of a breach.
But the tribunal rejected that blanket revenue approach.
Categorically. The tribunal fired back, stating that disgorgement must be strictly proportionate and mathematically correlated to actual harm.
Right.
Based on expert statistical evidence, the tribunal found as a fact that only 18% of Mrs. Dunn's clients actually received unsuitable advice that resulted in transferring their pensions to their detriment.
I see.
The FCA failed to prove a higher percentage. Therefore, the penalty had to match the specific crime, the unjust enrichment derived from that specific 18%, not the total firm revenue.
That is a profound shift. The regulator cannot just throw a blanket fine over a firm's total ledger because of procedural flaws. They have to prove the exact mathematical correlation to client detriment.
It is a major strategic victory against regulatory overreach. However, compliance officers really need to separate the penalty maths from the integrity findings.
Good point.
Mr. Fenech tried to argue the backdating was a one-off error made during a period of intense personal stress. The tribunal explicitly rejected that defense.
I didn't buy it.
Not at all. They stated the FCA must rely on a person's absolute veracity, especially during high-pressure scenarios. Total honesty is non-negotiable, and a lack of candor guarantees a ban, even if the tribunal protects you from disproportionate blanket fines.
Right. So while the FCA is getting disciplined on fines, they are actually handing a massive olive branch to the industry on the operational side.
Yeah, £108 million worth.
Exactly. Policy Statement PS 2615 finalizes rules streamlining the UK MIFIR transaction reporting regime. The headline figure is that £108 million in projected operational savings for the industry every single year.
The current annual compliance cost for transaction reporting sits at roughly £500 million, meaning this policy cuts the industry's burden by over 20%.
Wow.
It is one of the most tangible post-Brexit regulatory dividends we have seen so far.
So how does the FCA mechanically achieve a 20% cost reduction without blinding its own market surveillance?
Mostly by replacing raw data dumping with algorithmic oversight. First, they are cutting the mandatory reporting fields from 65 down to 52.
Okay.
The removed fields largely requested data that the FCA already possesses through other regulatory pipelines or market data feeds.
Which makes sense. Maintaining data architecture for 13 redundant fields is incredibly expensive. Every time a trade executes, systems have to pull, validate, and format that specific data point.
Yeah, it's a massive drag.
Dropping those fields removes significant server load and reduces validation errors. They're also entirely removing FX derivatives from the reporting requirements, immediately benefiting over 400 firms.
And the most structurally significant change is the descoping of instruments. The FCA is removing the reporting requirement for 7 million financial instruments, equities, bonds, specific derivatives that are only traded on EU venues.
7 million.
Yeah. This change alone saves UK firms £32 million annually. Mechanically, the FCA is making its FIDS database the absolute golden source. Firms will simply query FIDS via an API. If the instrument isn't listed there, the reporting obligation disappears.
But the implementation timeline is where IT strategy comes into play here.
Right.
The rules officially take effect on the 3rd of April 2028. However, the FCA is offering early adoption for technologically ready firms. But realistically, banking IT infrastructure cannot just start dropping 13 columns from an automated report tomorrow, right?
No, absolutely not. If you submit a 52-field report into the FCA's current system today, the schema will just reject it as a corrupted file.
Exactly.
Firms must wait until October 2026 when the FCA publishes the new validation rules and schema. That is the critical window. IT teams need to build their testing environments around that October 2026 date so they can transition early and lock in those savings well before the 2028 deadline.
So, with record profits and £108 million in regulatory savings, why are UK retail banks still trading at a massive discount on the FTSE 100 and 250? It's a glaring macroeconomic disconnect.
It really is.
Yeah.
But you have to tie the entire briefing together here. The equity markets are pricing in the grim domestic baseline we discussed at the very start of the show.
Right. The inflation, the energy costs.
Yes. Mid-cap and large-cap UK banks are heavily tethered to the domestic economy.
Yeah.
Institutional investors are looking at that ONS data. They see the supply chain disruptions, the cautious consumers, the geopolitical shocks, and the 70% of firms stressed by basic energy costs. The market looks at those headwinds and heavily discounts the future growth potential of the UK economy, which in turn drags down bank valuations. UK retail banking is essentially on sale.
So the market acknowledges the banks are highly profitable today, but prices in a subdued, high-default environment for tomorrow.
Precisely. And this FTSE valuation discount creates a negative feedback loop for the real economy. Because UK bank shares are undervalued, their cost of equity capital is artificially high.
Okay.
For bank executives and strategy teams, expanding the balance sheet through aggressive lending to SMEs, especially SMEs facing those energy costs, is incredibly expensive relative to their equity.
Which forces management to prioritize capital discipline. Instead of financing a manufacturing firm's expansion, the bank gets a better return on equity by initiating massive share buyback programs.
It becomes a purely mathematical decision. Buying back undervalued shares boosts earnings per share much more reliably than taking on domestic credit risk.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
If geopolitical shocks stabilize and UK growth forecasts improve, the re-rating potential for these bank stocks is enormous. But until that macroeconomic picture shifts, the discount persists, and capital preservation will continue to override aggressive lending into the real economy.
Let's swiftly recap the essential takeaways for the listener this week. If you are in legal or risk, the Barclays and MFS High Court battle is the critical warning signal.
Absolutely.
Interbank transparency is evolving, and relying on old bank creditor confidentiality rules to avoid warning peer lenders about systemic fraud is becoming legally perilous.
And for compliance teams, audit your Annex 1 partners immediately. Ensure they have bespoke, subsidiary-level AML controls that address their specific lending risks. Generic, off-the-shelf policies are now a massive regulatory liability.
Spot on. And for IT and operations, circle October 2026. That is when the new transaction reporting schemas launch, giving you the window to adopt the PS 2615 rules early and capture your share of those operational savings.
And just keep the Fenech and Dunne ruling in mind. The FCA demands total honesty and will enforce industry bans for a lack of candor, but the upper tribunal will step in to ensure financial penalties are strictly correlated to proven harm, not just a blanket fine on gross revenue.
Right. The entire landscape is shifting from tick-box compliance to systemic transparency, which leaves us with a final provocative thought to mull over. What happens when a bank's strict legal fiduciary duty to protect its own shareholders directly conflicts with its new unwritten regulatory duty of transparency to its fellow peer lenders?
Yeah, when the shadow banking liquidity dries up, who is legally allowed to grab the last chair?
Exactly. That's all from us this week. Thanks for listening to Reg Talk UK. Until next time, stay sharp and stay compliant.